Welcome back to the 127 Fit podcast. Today's guest is the owner of Des Moines Barbell Club and Hartman Strength. Today's guest is Jake Hartman. Jake, I want to welcome you to the 127 Fit podcast.
Thank you so much, Quentin. It's great to be here.
For sure, Jake. So we're going to just jump right into things. I've got 4 questions I'd like to ask all of my guests just to kind of get the conversational ball rolling, so to speak. The first question that I have for you is, how do you start your day? Do you have a specific routine or ritual you like to stick to on most mornings?
Yeah, so I have a 3-year-old. Well, he's going to be 3 this year, and then a 3-month-old kid. So with the 2 boys, the ritual is to be getting up and getting them ready for the day every day. I'm also, training in the mornings now with the kids. That's the best time for me to train. So normally I'll get up, get the kids ready for the day, head to the gym, do my normal training, and then start my workday.
Awesome. All right. So the second question that I have for you, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, or word?
This is a good question. So, all the mantras that have stuck with me throughout my life have been like the silly ones that your parents tell you when you're really young. And I would say the one that is probably stuck with me, especially more recently, is everything happens for a reason. So going through negotiating the new lease for the new gym and looking at all these different spaces, it's been a really interesting process to not get your heart set on a certain space or, things like that. So a lot of the things that have happened, I've had to remind myself, everything is happening for a reason. It's going to be better it's going to be better in the end once we find the end space or whenever we get to that end goal. So I would say that's
Cool. For sure. And I definitely have, seen that kind of quote or that mantra or that wording play out in my life as well. So that's super cool. Third question, as a part of the warm-up questions I have for you, Jake, is there a book or podcast that has been especially impactful in your life?
I would have to take this way back to right when I graduated high school. So I didn't go to college, but I started doing sales in the fitness industry right out of school. And what really sort of caught my eye was, I don't know if you've ever heard of a guy named Brian Tracy, but he's basically like a motivational speaker. And he had all these audiobooks. And when I would go to work every day, at the time I was living in Chicago, so I had to take the L train to work, I would listen to the Brian Tracy audiobooks, which were basically, once again, motivational. They talked about sales and relationship building and business and, financial management and things like that. And I would say of all things, that was probably what has stuck with me the most and what I got the most benefit out of, just because once again, I was fresh out of high school. I was from a small town in Iowa. I was working in Chicago, trying to figure out how to do sales and manage people and work with, with other people. So that was probably, the one that stuck with you the most.
Cool. Now, is there, in terms of kind of this content that you were consuming at that age or that season stage of your life, Brian Tracy, is there kind of one thing? And I want to, at some point, I would love to kind of get back to the sales side of things, but just, is there maybe one thing that the content that you were consuming of Brian's that you kind of remember that really stuck out maybe at that time, or a piece of content that you still kind of use to this day?
Yeah, it's basically just the mindset that anybody can do anything. Being able to, once again, being from a small town in Iowa and, sort of build your empire based on what you want to do and how you want to do it and, sort of on your terms. That was the biggest part. And obviously still sort of doing that today.
For sure. Very cool. All right. So kind of the question, just to wrap up the warm-up questions, Jake, what is one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
This is a tough question, but I think, when I was younger and I first got into the workforce, and this has kind of always been just me as a person, I work really, really hard. So I think I would tell my younger self, like, hey, take your days off, take your vacations, spend that time with your family, spend that time with your friends. Like it's always going to be there when you get back to it. And that's the only sort of piece of information I think would be pretty eye opening.
Cool. Yeah. No, that's super valuable because I think a lot of us that are, type A and really motivated and disciplined and driven like that, that's something that's really hard for us. Right. And I'm sure, we'll kind of get into your the birth of your child and things like that. But I'm sure probably, having your child and stuff like that's probably helped you maybe, I'm sure it's probably created a little bit more craziness and chaos, right? But I'm sure it's probably helped you with that mentality of just kind of like enjoying kind of the moments, right? So definitely valuable advice. So kind of at this point, Jake, I want to transition into kind of like your younger years. I want to get your backstory. So you've kind of alluded to growing up in a small town here in Iowa. So if you don't mind sharing with myself and the 127 Fit podcast listeners, where did you grow up? Kind of what did those younger years look like? Were you involved in sports? Were you involved in any other extracurricular activities? Do you have siblings? Just kind of paint that picture for us of what the younger days were like for you, Jake, if you don't mind.
Sure. So I'm originally from Southeast Iowa. I'm from Burlington and born and raised. During my high school years, I did get into some wrestling, not until my sophomore year. So I wrestled my sophomore through my senior year. Post high school, after that, I got into some MMA, sort of natural transition to that mixed martial arts life at the time. Mm-hmm. I do have a brother and a sister. My sister is handicapped. She has a Cardia syndrome. So, and they are twins. So to add more to that. That's basically the overlay of family and where I'm from and all that. And we can dig deeper into the sports if you'd like.
Well, what I really want to touch on, because, you and myself, even though we've never met in person, but just following you on social media, there's definitely some similarities that we have with just, being involved in strength and owning a gym and things like that. But what I really want to touch on, because a lot of my, listeners are going to be, from Colorado, because that's kind of where I started this podcast. That's where I was living for the last 2.5 years before I moved back to Iowa, kind of in Denver, Colorado Springs, people on your end listening, in Des Moines. So kind of bigger cities. So I'm from a small town. I bought, the gym that I grew up training at here in Cherokee, Iowa, up in Northwest Iowa. It's a town of 5,000 or less people. It's small town. And you kind of mentioned earlier about when you're consuming that content of Brian Tracy about, kind of this mindset and, being from a small town, you've alluded to that several times. So just from your perspective, what was it like for you growing up in a small town? And what I would really love to get from you, Jake, have there been some hurdles or obstacles, and maybe it's the mindset side of things that you've kind of had to jump over or break through in terms of being from a small town? So how was it growing up in a small town? And then have there been some pluses and minuses from your perspective of, growing up in a small town in the Midwest?
Yeah, so I would say, living in Burlington, I didn't really know what the outside world looked like when I was younger. I did travel, I was into hardcore music. So we would go to like Iowa City and some of the bigger, cities in Iowa, which are obviously still small, and like experience what that life was like. But when I turned 18 and graduated high school, I knew that I wasn't going to stay in Burlington. I knew that not that I had to get out, but I knew what the limiting factors were going to look like. And my family owns a garage door business. So at the time when I was a senior in high school, I was installing garage doors, and it was fine. It was nice to work with my dad and my brother eventually. But I decided hey, I want to get out and experience the world. What else is out there? So, right out of high school, I moved to the Quad Cities, which is like an hour and a half north, and started working sales at Gold's Gym in Davenport. Worked there for a while, and the guy that I lived with, his name is Lawrence Scott. He actually owns Rockwell Barbell now. He was like, "Hey, I want to move to Chicago." And at the time, like, it was me, Lawrence, and my other friend Dan, and we had no idea what it was going to be like to move to Chicago. We didn't have jobs lined up. Like, we were just like, "Hey, this sounds cool. Let's do it." And it's funny how it all worked out in the end, because I moved to Chicago on a referral. I got a job at another gym called Crunch. And at the time, Crunch had like 5 gyms in the area. Lawrence did like a little bit of school stuff. And my friend Dan ended up joining the Army eventually, shortly after we moved there. But anyways, I worked for Crunch for years while I was there, and actually introduced Lawrence to the fitness industry. He came on as one of my sales reps, and it's just, looking back at it now, it's so funny to see that he's built like one of the top powerlifting gyms in the Chicago area, after just being introduced to it that way. So after that, I mean, I had moved around. Crunch eventually closed the locations in Chicago, and they sent me down to work one of their locations in Miami. After that, I moved back to Chicago, realizing I missed the Midwest. I missed all my friends. Made the same move again, but I moved out east. So I worked for another company in Washington, D.C., and then went back to Crunch in New York City. And eventually I made it back to Iowa. But, during all those moves, I think what I was trying to do was sort of find my place. Like, I thought in my mind, like, Burlington's not my place. Even though it's where I'm from, even though I love all the people that are there and I know it, really, really well, like, I feel like my place is somewhere else. So, moving all throughout the country, although it gave me a lot of really positive experiences, I learned, way more than I ever would have if I would have stayed in Iowa. It also taught me that you don't have a place. Your place is wherever you're at, and you sort of you make the best of it. And every place comes with its positives and negatives. So I would say that was one thing that, sort of being from a small town in Iowa, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I think was harder, because I just had a very small view of the world, and when you have that little view, hey, I know what Burlington's like. I know what these other smaller cities in Iowa are like. You don't really know like what the possibilities are, what different places are like, and where your place is. So
Cool. Awesome. So we're definitely going to get into kind of all the travels here in a minute, but before we just kind of wrap up those younger years, thinking back to, let's just say like elementary age up through high school, was there, anything that you can kind of think of or comes to mind that really impacted you, at that stage of your life, and maybe has, carried throughout, adulthood? Was there, I mean, maybe it was a coach, maybe it was a teacher, maybe something from your parents, maybe, it was an injury, an accident. Is there anything kind of from those younger years, Jake, that really impacted you? It could be positive or negative, that kind of comes to mind.
So I would say, and this is sort of my introduction to weightlifting as well. When I was younger, I was the runt. I was definitely one of the smaller people in our classes. So, right out the gate, I was like, well, I don't want to be, the small guy out here. I want to, like, I don't get picked on, because obviously in your younger years, when you're the smaller kid, you're an easier target. So I would say that, that's in a weird way kind of how it evolved into me getting into the place I am today, in the fitness industry, in the gym industry. But aside from that, I learned so much about how to treat people from my mother. And unfortunately, she passed of cancer, is no longer around. But, looking back at my younger years, that's really like the highlight of everything I remember is, how well She treated everybody, how understanding she was. And like I said earlier, my sister has a cardio syndrome. Seeing her adapt to that situation, which had to have been the hardest curveball in life. Looking at it now from a parent's perspective, like I can't even imagine having twins, and one with special needs. Just that really showed me that no matter what happens in life, like you just got to keep on going. And that mindset really, especially like I said, as a parent now, as an adult now, looking back at it, I'm like, wow, that was, very impressive.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Will you just touch on a little bit, your sibling that has special needs? Can you just kind of explain? Because I've never really heard of what she has. So can you just, if you don't mind, would you just touch on that? Because that's definitely something I'm sure that had some sort of impact in your life as well, right? So just, if
Yeah.
you don't mind, I would love just to learn a little bit more about, her condition.
Yep. So basically, she has a cardio syndrome, which is a neurological disorder. And the easiest way to think about it is the two cortexes of her brain are not connected. So it only affects girls. And I say girls because it's usually, unfortunately, the lifespan of a girl with a cardio syndrome. They don't live too far into their 20s. And when she was born, she also had brain tumors. So basically, right when she was born, a few months after she was born, my mom realized that something wasn't right. That she was having like seizures and that she wasn't able to focus and that sort of stuff. They took her in for brain surgery. So throughout the first like few months of her life, when I was pretty young, we were spending the night in the hospital, and it was pretty wild. But yeah, no, she's healthy today. She has startle seizures, and has always had startle seizures where basically if a loud noise happens, she'll have a seizure. So growing up with that, we all learned how to be very quiet. It's pretty funny to see uh, the habits that I have in my life now. And I, obviously haven't lived with my sister since I was 18,
Right.
still around her during holidays and stuff. But like when I open cans of pop, for example, I'll like muffle it with my hand so it doesn't make a loud like noise.
Yeah.
Still to this day, even not even when, she's around. So, but that's kind of the gist of what a cardio syndrome is, how it affects her. It affects girls differently too. So, you have some that are higher functioning, some that are lower functioning. My sister, she knows people, like she can react to people, but she doesn't talk. She doesn't walk. But so, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you, Jake, touching on that, because that's something I've honestly never heard of. So now you mentioned that when you were younger, that's when you kind of started getting into the weightlifting. Will you just expound on that, because that's obviously has shaped who you are as a human being and as a man. So was it through sports? Was it through like a PE class? How did you actually, when you were younger, start getting into strength training?
So when I was 15 years old, my mom would go to a local gym in Burlington called Graham's Family Fitness, and I think it's still there today, and I think they might still have the same equipment that they had back then, which were like the old chain Nautilus machines. It's actually a pretty cool gym.
That's
Um,
awesome.
so and everybody knows everybody in Burlington. So my mom, saw that I had this natural interest in training when I would go with her and like lifting weights. And she was like, "Hey, why don't you get a job working at Graham's over the summertime?" So she talked to the owner there, and they had me basically work in the office. Um, and like looking back at it now, it's like there's no way any of this would fly because they had like tanning there too, and I would like
Yeah.
sign people up for tanning and like give people memberships. Like it was is yeah, it's pretty funny now.
That's awesome.
But I mean, this was like 17, 18 years ago now. So, but that was my first experience in the gym. And it's funny because that was my first experience my job was to basically run the gym, because they weren't around during the day. They had like a dance studio. Also, it was attached. So they would obviously teach dance classes all day, and I would take care of the gym. So it was cleaning, signing people up for memberships, tanning, organizing the gym in general, and like putting weights away, that sort of stuff. So that was my first like introduction to the gym.
Cool.
And it was a good experience, but I would say I didn't really get into strength training as I know it today, until I was the next year in high school.
Okay.
So that was the next year I started doing wrestling, and we had weight training for wrestling in the mornings. And going in to do the weight training and being around other guys, I was like, okay, this is like I liked wrestling, but I loved training in the gym.
Right.
Like that was like my time. And at that point too was also when I realized like, hey, I'm pretty good at this, which is obviously why I liked the training in the gym more than the wrestling, because obviously I was wrestling with kids who started wrestling. We're in Iowa when they were learning how to walk.
For sure.
So I was just every practice getting the crap beat out of me, which I also love that, because I'm one of those people that if I don't know how to do something, and the result is me getting my ass kicked, I want to learn how to do it. So
yeah. Cool. So, in terms of kind of like, working at this local gym, when you were a teenager, and then getting exposed to strength training kind of through sport, did you kind of know, because you mentioned earlier that you didn't go to college or anything, did you kind of know then, like towards going into like your senior year in high school, that you wanted to do something kind of within, the fitness industry, or have something to do with like strength training? Was that pretty evident kind of going into those last years of high school then for you?
no, honestly, no, it wasn't at all. After high school, by the time I got to my senior year of wrestling, I was decent. Like I wasn't good. I would say I could wrestle pretty much anybody and do all right. But at that point, I also started to train MMA. So
Okay.
what's funny is, the whole time, even after I graduated, and at this time, there was a couple MMA gyms in the area. You had Militich, which was up in Davenport, and at the time, this was like the heyday of Militich. So you had all of the, multiple UFC champions training at that gym at the same time. And then you had the guy that I trained with. His name is Gabe Lemley, and he was a former Militich guy, and he had moved back to New London, Iowa at the time. But like guy was like great friends with Spencer Fisher and a lot of those other guys. But so after I graduated high school during that summertime, I would, drive up and train with Gabe every single night after work. And at that time I thought, and if I probably had stuck with it too, and like not moved to Chicago and just trained at Militich or whatever, I probably could have made something of it. But at the time I thought I was going to be the next UFC fighter. I thought I'd be the next UFC champ. I hadn't, and it's kind of like maybe an immature mindset, but I wasn't thinking about my profession at the time.
Right.
I was hanging garage doors, and I was like, cool, got my paycheck. Now let's go do the fun thing. And then, after working at Gold's, I did kind of catch the bug working at Gold's, because it was sales, and I love sales, just in general. So being able to help people get introduced to the gym, I felt good about that, but I never thought like, hey, I'm going to own a gym someday at that point in my life.
Okay.
I thought like, hey, I'm just going to work this job, and then I'm going to go train MMA. And then someday it's going to happen. But, yeah. Cool.
So I want to just get kind of, I want to start kind of unpacking what you kind of shared a little bit earlier about kind of your travels, right? You worked at the Gold's Gym, you worked at the Crunch Fitness, you were on the East Coast, you were kind of exploring, I would say, and living in different cities and places and doing different things. But from my understanding, the similarity with all of that travel was you were working in these gyms, you were doing sales, right? And you just mentioned like, I love sales, and most people those words don't come out of their mouth, right? So just touch on, because again, during the warm-up questions, you talked about Brian Tracy and you were consuming his content. But let's talk about working for what we kind of know as today as a Globo gym, these Gold Gyms, Crunch Fitnesses. And let's just talk about that, kind of like what you enjoyed about it, what you didn't enjoy. But I really want to unpack the sales side of things and just kind of all of your travel. So just first of all, let's talk about, how did you get kind of like into sales? How did you fall in love with sales? And what does sales mean to you? Because that sales carries, a very negative connotation to a lot of people. But it's, again, I think it goes back to mindset and how you kind of, approach sales and things like that. So let's talk about sales. Why do you love it? How did you kind of learn to sell training and memberships within these Globo gyms?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, because when I moved to Davenport and got offered my first sales job at a gym, I didn't accept the sales job per se. I accepted the gym.
Right.
Like, I went into this Gold's Gym in Davenport and I was like, wow, I was selling Graham's Fitness in Burlington, which is like, had equipment from 10 years ago at the time. And this is a brand new state-of-the-art facility that had all of the newest, nicest equipment at the time. And I didn't know what sales was at that time. I thought, yeah, I sign people up at Graham's, like they come in the door and I sign them up, right? And I'm like, it's got to be basically the same thing. But I was in for a really rude awakening at that point. At the time, this Gold's was being managed by somebody who become a really lifelong friend of mine, and his name is Jake Soul. And he worked for Aspen Athletic Clubs at the time, which is like, and at the time was the largest chain of clubs here in Des Moines. Jake had all of that, late 90s, early 2000s sales training from the fitness industry, which was, some of it was try to get people to buy as much as they can, which is obviously what gives sales a bad name. But Jake was one of those guys who had a really, really pure heart as well. So, what I learned from him is like, you're trying to help people make these changes. And it didn't really resonate with me until I signed somebody up for the gym the first time, and, sold them this large personal training package. And then, 6 months down the road, they come back to me and they've lost, 30 pounds, and their life has changed. They said like, hey, my doctor said my cholesterol was this, and I was on the brink of a heart attack, and now they're healthy. And that was the first time where I was like, okay, that aspect of it, the fitness aspect of it, because before all I really cared about was training heavy, and bodybuilding and those sorts of things. When I was working at Grams, I was reading Muscle and Fitness. It was that, it wasn't like, hey, like I care about my blood pressure and my blood work and all that stuff. So, learning that aspect of it in the very beginning, what I liked and what I didn't like about the commercial gyms, moving to Crunch was a very interesting move, because at the time they had separated from Bally's a couple of years ago, and they had really become their own brand. And Crunch's thing at the time, and they were the first gym to do this, but it was the counterculture gym. So it was, one of their slogans was like, no beige walls, meaning like they weren't your average gym, like it was where people that were, different would go and train. And for me, that really resonated because, like I said earlier, like I was into hardcore music, like I was into stuff that, kids in high school didn't really understand.
Yeah.
So I fit in really well there, so since I fit in well there, I had this, both training on what is good sales and what is sort of, grimy sales, if you will, what looks bad. And I connected really, really well with a lot of people. I was just really honest with everybody, that came in the door, and I would ask them what their goals are. And I would say, hey, this is how you get to your goals. And if I think that you're if I'm going to sell you something that I think that you don't need, like, I'm just not going to do it. I had that ability to do that because I was really good at helping people. And it wasn't like, hey, here's the one size fits all thing for every single person that walks through the door. And people appreciated that. So the business in Chicago was all referrals. When I worked at Gold's Gym, we used to have those little lead boxes. You remember lead boxes?
Yeah.
Basically, for those that don't know what a lead box is, it's a box that says enter to win a free 1 week trial or a free 1 year membership to the gym. And you would call every single person and you would say, hey, you want a free week, come in and check out the gym. And then you would basically have them come to the gym and you try to sell them a membership. That's one of the more grimy types of sales, if you will. And some people would come in and try it out for a week and they would join and they would say, hey, this is great. But eventually lead boxes, you would just spend so much time. Like I would spend hours driving around Davenport, picking up my leads. And I remember getting like 10 leads and being like, yes, I have so many leads to go call now. But like once I made it to Chicago, like I did have some lead boxes starting off, but like the referrals just kept coming in, and I got to the point where people were always like, what are you doing, Jake? Like you never leave the gym. Like how many lead boxes do you even have? And I'm like, I don't have any anymore. Like I don't need them. Like people are going to come to me. They know, and being able to build those relationships and like actually help people and actually connect. And I mean, there have been times where like on an emotional level, people will come in and, like you'll have conversations and, you'll have some people that'll cry because they're reaching that point where they want to lose this weight, or you'll even have people get upset with you for you telling them what they need. Right. And
yeah.
It's funny because some of the people that I've sold memberships to that have been like my best long-term clients are people that I basically had arguments with, and like looking back at it, it's those conversations later that happen that are like, hey, thanks for like calling me on my BS. Like I needed somebody at that time to like tell me basically you're not going to do it unless you do it this way. But I was able to take that sort of method and mindset with Crunch in relationship building and take that and as I got promoted into sales management or regional sales management, teach that to my people. Like you got to let the old ways of sales go because, and this was also at the time where you were starting to see the internet. It's kind of funny to say this, but gyms realize like, hey, we can do more advertising on the internet. We can do lead collection and generation on the internet. We no longer have to rely on our people to go out and find people. So as I sort of saw this world changing, I was like, all right, like we have to adapt. We can no longer do it the way that I was originally taught because, some of that stuff might continue to work, but the game's changing. So it's been interesting to see even now how much it's changed because, and obviously working in the gym that I have now, it's entirely different than the global gym world, which we can touch on. But it's been quite the learning journey. But I just love the challenge. That's been it for me. Is I want to have a job where I'm at least challenged somewhat every single day.
For sure. So what was, going from kind of the small town Burlington gym to then going to, the gym in Dubuque, and then you're, kind of here, there, and everywhere. Did you enjoy being in those global gyms, the atmosphere of those bigger gyms, or did you not really care? Kind of just touch on that. Cause now I kind of am familiar just through social media with, Des Moines Barbell Club. And then, I'm having Wes Keith of 22nd Street Barbell on the podcast. And I'm more of kind of like the gym that I own. It's, it's been open for over 30 years. It's opened by a bodybuilder from the golden era. It's kind of like more nitty gritty, smaller, old school hardcore. Right. So what was the experience just kind of like being in the Globo gym? Did you find that to be positive, or did you just not really like that?
I didn't really, I was kind of indifferent. Once I got into Crunch and like the vibes fit more of my vibes, like even though it was still a corporate owned gym, commercial style, it wasn't like a 24-hour fitness. It wasn't like any of these other places where it's like, you know, you got 5 million people coming in to use the gym. And the other part of it too is back then there weren't, I mean, obviously you sort of have your hole in the wall gyms in like some of these smaller towns in Iowa, but there wasn't the 22nd Streets, there wasn't the Des Moines Barbells, there wasn't like these larger, sort of specialized, more raw style gyms. And it's funny because now that's sort of the trend, if you will. It's,
Yeah.
people, they're very anti-commercial gym, and I'm okay with that. But sometimes I'm like, hey man, it's nice to have a hot tub and a sauna.
For sure.
And I'm jealous of the people that train at Lifetime sometimes.
Yeah.
But my mindset is like, hey, I want to have a gym where people can go that are serious about training and train really hard and not, have to worry about or focus on all of the other noise that's happening in their day or in the gym or whatever it might be. So, I mean, now it's like I couldn't imagine going back and training anywhere else. But at the time, like that was kind of the norm, and some of the stuff was nicer and some of it wasn't. But I didn't know any different, I guess.
For sure. So out of like this entire experience, and then I want to kind of get into, your own training. But throughout kind of this time period, Jake, when you're working in sales and kind of moving your way up and going to different gyms and stuff like that, what's kind of like the one takeaway from this entire season or time frame of your life? The sales, you talked about just kind of being truthful and honest with people in your sales, a relationship building. What's kind of that one takeaway or maybe a couple of takeaways from that season or those seasons of life for you that kind of continues to impact you today?
Oh man, it's kind of tough because I think part of it that I learned the most was, like I touched on earlier with the moving around a lot. It's like, it doesn't matter where you're at. It's like, it matters what you make of it.
Right.
I think that was one of the biggest takeaways. I mean, I enjoyed doing the sales. But one thing I did know when I was doing this is that I was young and I was able to work 12-hour days, 7 days a week sometimes.
Yeah.
And, I didn't have a lot of balance at that time. It was very, very focused on, and unfortunately focused on making money. And although when I started working for Crunch, I made a lot more money than I'd ever made before. It still was for a gym too. Like I was still working for another corporation. I wasn't working for myself.
Right.
So those are probably the biggest things. Is, like, hey, I was really dedicating myself to something that wasn't really mine. I was trying to move around and try to find sort of my spot, but like in the end, I got to make my own spot.
For sure.
Obviously, those are all things and reasons why I've ended up to where I am today.
Mm-hmm. So I want to get into your own training. You kind of talked about earlier when you're in Burlington, you're reading like the Muscle and Fitness and stuff like that. So just talk about, if you don't mind, Jake, kind of the evolution of your training. What did it look like kind of when you were younger? And then I really want to kind of start talking about like, when did you really get into powerlifting? Because obviously that's kind of like, your Des Moines Barbell Club gym, I think, is more focused on the powerlifting. I know you promote meets along with the West. So just talk about the evolution of your own training for yourself, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, when I first started off in high school, it was just about, I was reading Muscle and Fitness saying, hey, I want to be like these bodybuilder guys. I want to be jacked. And then as time went on, getting into the wrestling, into the MMA, it wasn't really as much about being big as it was being strong and just being able to, have a defense and be able to be strong in general. So
Right.
after that, when I started working more in the commercial gym space, I was definitely doing less training. I wasn't really training for anything specific, which for me has always been the hardest part, right? Like if I'm not training for a meet or I'm not training for a fight or whatever it might look like, I'm just not going to train to the same level. And I think that's probably normal for most people. And then eventually, I decided, hey, I want to start doing more strength focused work. And this was probably, 12 years ago now. And at the time, there wasn't a lot out there on the internet as far as powerlifting stuff goes. So I started doing Jim Wendler's 5-3-1 at the time, still working at Crunch. And like I was saying earlier, there wasn't powerlifting gyms around me. So I didn't have that vibe environment, didn't know what it was even like, didn't have anybody to sort of tell me like, hey, go do a powerlifting meet. You should sign up for one. When I lived in New York, I thought about doing one, but I was like, I don't even know where to look for a powerlifting meet or where to start. So it got pushed back to many, many years later. And I moved back to Iowa and was training, moved here to Ankeny to the Des Moines area. Was training at Anytime Fitness. And one of my good high school buddies at the time, his name is Joe Ellis, was training at 22nd Street. And he was like, hey, you should come check out the gym. You're strong. And I'm like, okay, I don't really know like any of this stuff. So I went there and trained and, met a lot of people. They were all like, hey, we're doing this meet. And I'm like, what's a meet? How do you do this? And that was the exposure and experience that I needed, was to be around people that were going to, basically force you to do a meet. If you're going to be around, you got to compete. And if you're already strong, like you'd be foolish not to compete. Right. And that was like 2013 was when I did my first powerlifting meet. And it was here in Des Moines. And it went pretty well. I had no idea what I was doing. So it's, as it goes, you never really do when it's your first time. But
for sure,
was able to put up numbers that I was pretty happy with. And over the years, I just continued to grind on the powerlifting. Once I got the bug, once I knew what competition was, then it just totally lit a fire that I'd never had before. And I was getting stronger without the fire. Since then, obviously had kids, gone through the whole sort of life transformation now into a dad. But I'm looking at getting back into competing now after a little layoff. And I'm very, very excited to get back into some serious training.
Awesome. So let's touch on just kind of 22nd Street Barbell's influence on you, because obviously again, having Wes on the podcast and having some other people that are connected to that community and that family on the podcast, and I'm sure some of the listeners to your episode or have connections there or still train there. So just talk about kind of the influence of 22nd Street Barbell and, you were, at these Globo gyms and having all of those experiences. And then, and even you said you were training at an Anytime Fitness at the time, which is, I've been a personal trainer at an Anytime Fitness out in Colorado. It's definitely not a hardcore setting. So just talk about that influence of 22nd Street Barbell. And did that kind of start turning your gears in terms of maybe this is something, a gym like this is something that I would love to have in the future?
Yeah. So, training at the gym at the time was a very different experience than what I'd ever seen and been used to before. And I think the biggest thing I took away from training with the team, like the original group at 22nd Street, was just how tight knit everybody was, and what like team training looked like training with other people that were going to hold you accountable, that would call you if you missed a session, if you missed a set, if you missed a rep, like they're going to call you out and hold you accountable to your training. After training there for many years, I started training at my garage. And really the main reason why I started training in the garage was I was going to have a kid. And I was like, I'm somebody who's very regimented and scheduled when it comes to like every single hour of my day has to be set to to basically almost the exact minute in order for me to be as productive as I can be. And also we could talk about the kids more later on, but when I found out I was going to have my first kid, or we decided that we were going to have our first kid, I was like, okay, this is a game changer for me. And in the back of my mind, I had thought like, hey, it'd be cool to have a gym at some point, but it was never like my driving motivator. Everything happened very, very organic from the garage space into the first space at CrossFit 8035. We shared space with them. And basically what it looked like was I had this garage gym that people would come and train, pretty much in the beginning, it was just a couple guys that would be like my training partners. And then eventually I had people that would come over to my house and train during the day when I wasn't even training. And we'd have like 5 cars in our driveway. And my wife was like, all right, it's time to make this something else. Like, I love your friends, but people are here all the time in the garage throwing weights around, and you need to go do something else. And I'm like, all right. So I started looking for spots, and I was looking for spots kind of like, hey, I don't really have money to do this, because it wasn't like something where I had like 100 paying members already or something like that. It was like, hey, starting from very grassroots, what can I afford? Luckily I had the programming business already, so like I had something to like throw into this, but it wasn't like, hey, I'm going to throw some money into this and make money off of it. It was like, hey, I'm just going to have a spot where I can go and train with the guys that I'm already training with. So we moved into CrossFit 8035 in the end of 2019. So November 2019 was like the open date. And it's honestly kind of one of those things where nobody knew that COVID was going to happen. Nobody everything was like, oh, this is going to be amazing. The gym space was 1,000 square foot. It was shared space with inside of CrossFit 8035. So it wasn't really the most ideal situation for a gym as like what as we know it today, like, which I never imagined it would be what it is today at this point. But it was enough. It was twice the space I had in the garage. It was enough to get some more equipment in there and some more people could train. And then within the first couple months, I was like, oh, we're going to need more space. Like, this is really taking off. And I mean, honestly, it's kind of lucky that COVID happened for us, because it slowed down the growth of the gym enough for me to be like, all right, I got to start looking for new spaces and like to sort of plan those things. Otherwise, I think my members would have been like, what are you doing, Jake? Like, why do you have so many people in this little hole in the wall space? So, and it was nice because like my expenses weren't super crazy at the smaller space. But anyways, fast forward to, the new space. We just moved into a 5,550 square foot space in the East Village here, which is the east side of downtown Des Moines. And it's since moving here, it's exploded. Like, once again, I never thought it would be what it is today. In the beginning, and I never, funny to say, never planned to have a gym, even, which might sound crazy to a lot of gym owners or even some of my members. But really the reason why I have this gym is the core group of guys who would come over and train in the garage with me that would tell me, hey man, you got to open your own gym. You got to do your own thing. Or the people that were like, hey, if you ever opened a gym, I would join. And at the moment I was like, there's no way. Like, like it sounds nice. It's like telling somebody that they look jacked, right? Like, it's like, yeah, thanks, man. Like, you're cool. But like you in the back of your mind, you're like, that's not reality. Like, reality is if I opened a gym, like it would just be me and my boys training there. So
right.
It's been a pretty wild ride, to say the least.
So let's there's some more things I want to touch on here, but since we're kind of at the place where you just opened up the new space for Des Moines Barbell Club, just kind of unpack what Des Moines Barbell Club offers. Like, is it a private facility? Is it open to the public? Since we're kind of there, why don't you just share kind of all the things about Des Moines Barbell Club and then we'll discuss some other things.
Sure. So, you know, once again, when we moved into that first space, the smaller space, at the time I opened it up to the public, but it was mainly just people that knew me that were joining. When I moved there originally, I had one of my clients at the time, Dylan, was looking for a space to train some clients. So I invited him to come check out the gym, and it's evolved into him becoming the manager of the space now. I still work a day job, so really he's the one that's in here most of the day, both training clients and keeping care of the space. And he's been a godsend as far as that goes, because I don't know if I would be able to do it without him, honestly.
Yeah.
So, at the time it was open to the public, but it was still very limited, right? Like when somebody joined that I didn't know, I'd be like, who is this person?
Right.
Like it was weird to me, because at least most times I knew somebody at least through somebody. When I saw a name I didn't know at all, I'd be like, that's weird. But anyway, so moving into the new space, obviously we have 5 times the space we had in the old spot. And the gym is focused on powerlifting, sort of like you alluded to earlier. But it's bodybuilding, strongman, athletic performance. Really, if you're somebody that's serious about training, that's what the gym is really geared towards. We have some trainers here on staff. Currently, we have Dylan, like I said, he's the manager, and he's also training his members and clients out of the gym. He also has an online training business similar to myself. We have Joel, who's training clients here as well. We have Kyle. Kyle's going to be starting here. You might be familiar with Kyle Keogh, world record powerlifter. He's going to be doing both small group training and in-person training. He just started doing online and has a large online following as well. And then we also have Logan, who's going to be coming on as a physical therapist, and doing some training here as well. So we're going to have, run the gamut as far as strength sports, as far as athletic performance. My goal has always been to just dedicate my space to bettering people, sort of regardless of what your goal is. And when we moved into the new space, it went from being more powerlifting specific to more general population. Being open to the public has allowed us to, gain members that, although might not be powerlifters specifically, have more specific goals, or just enjoy the environment of the gym and bring a unique perspective. The gym is 24 hours. It's down here in the East Village, so it's a very unique place. Offers a very unique service, and like I was talking about earlier, is this type of gym is in now. People are very much over the commercial gyms. The environment, obviously the equipment is nice, but being able to go somewhere where you're not being judged by other people, where you can pick up your weights and not have to set them down nicely, and you can make a little noise and enjoy your workouts. It's a unique space in this area for sure.
Awesome, dude. Now, I kind of just want, because it sounds like you're a very goal oriented individual, Jake. So, and I know you've kind of talked about where it's like, I never really wanted to have my own gym, and it really seems like this is just kind of like a very organic, natural unfolding in your life, which is cool, because that's kind of like the best way to do things, right? Just let life happen as it's supposed to happen and not try to force things. But with that being said, now that you're kind of in the middle of this business and it's going great, do you kind of have some like specific goals? I know you said like kind of the main goal for your gym is to better people, right? But in terms of like just kind of like business metrics and like business goals and like a long-term vision for Des Moines Barbell Club, do you kind of have some of that stuff written out or in the back of your mind? And if so, kind of what does that long-term goal or vision look like for your gym?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll tell you, and I'll say this to anybody, like when I opened both gym spaces, I have when I had my first kid, you sort of have this like freak out moment, It's like the reality of it. Hey, this is going to happen. Like you're about
Yeah.
to sign for this much money, or you're about to have a kid, a whole human that you're responsible for. And that comes with a whole list of responsibilities. I had goals in my mind for this new space, and I'll be honest with you, we've already exceeded my entire year's goal in the first month.
Wow.
So the metrics, like they don't even make sense anymore. And it all, and I guess I should say this, like when I sat down, I said, hey, okay, this is what I have to do to feel good about this. And it was like, hey, if we gain 5 members a month, I'm going to feel really good about this. And like I said, we've already well exceeded that. So I have no idea. When some more backstory on this too. I still work my day job, so I do this sort of for the members, and that's kind of how it always has been. I've never done this for money. Like this is not the main source of my income, and I think that is a different approach than most everybody else. And maybe someday it will be. Maybe someday I'll quit my day job. Maybe someday they'll get sick of me. I guess my boss is somehow listening to this. But like I said earlier, like Dylan's the one managing the space. I'm the one coming up with the crazy ideas of like, hey, we should get this gigantic building and get all this new nice equipment and like build this and that and the other. But when we moved into this new space, I had a kid in November as well. So I have, 2 boys. And I got to give a lot of credit to my wife because she's an absolute rock star for dealing with me and the gym and my day job and all that. And, she would probably say that I worked my butt off. But those first few weeks before we opened this spot, February 1st, I would work my day job, put the boys to bed, come here at 9 o'clock at night and work until I couldn't work anymore. And sometimes that was, 1 in the morning, whatever. Go home and go to sleep and wake up at 5 a.m. again when my older boy would wake up, because that's just when he wakes up every day now.
Yeah.
And do it all over again. So I did that for a good 2 weeks straight just to get this spot ready for the members. And I think that's what, maybe I'm to my fault. I'm a perfectionist. So like I have this vision in my mind. But when I was in here working on the space, I had those, 5 members a month,
Yeah.
whatever. But then I'm like sitting there thinking, I'm like, man, this is in the East Village in the heart of Des Moines. This space is insane. Like it's super nice. I guess I shouldn't say it's super nice. It's a warehouse space. It's a hole in the wall, man. It's not Lifetime, but like
Right.
it's a cool vibe. It's a great location.
Yeah, it looks beautiful, man. It really
it's
does.
a very
I've seen the
cool.
pictures.
If you're into this thing, it's a very cool thing.
Absolutely.
So, I started to get these like crazy thoughts in my mind, but like I said earlier, like it's not why I did it. I hope it gets to, whatever crazy point that it can get to. But my goal was like, hey, I want to make this my thing. I want to make it the best thing that I can make it. And in this case, it's a gym. And this is just my mindset in general. And I think that, people notice this. But they also notice that I'm crazy and I'm in here until 1 o'clock in the morning doing these things. So it's but nonetheless, that's sort of the answer to your metrics or what my vision is or any of that. Like, I don't know, man. This was my vision. So I after the first month, I'm like, I need to sit down and figure, because like I'm motivated based off of that, sort of, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, dang, man, I last month I thought, hey, I'm going to open this 5,000 square foot gym, and it's, like it's scary and it's crazy and all of that. And now I'm like, well, it happened. Now we're here. So now where do we go?
Yeah.
And I've signed a 3-year lease, and this space is great, but in the back of my mind, I'm already like, dude, like if this continues going the way that it's going, then there's so much possibility for the other things, the other crazy thoughts that you had, because there for a while, I did have a discussion with another local guy, and we were talking about opening a gym, and, he had all the finances to do it, and we were going to do it that route, which was throw a bunch of money into it and, make it work. And looking back at it now, I'm like, I'm glad I didn't do that. I'm glad I did it all very organic from the bottom up, because although it took, a couple years to get to this point, it's all mine, like, and obviously the members, but like the space there's not a lot of debt. There's not a lot of crazy. So it's like, we can just keep doing what we're doing and not have to have a ton of worry about, finances and all that crazy stuff. Once again, maybe that will change in the future. But yeah, it's been pretty wild, man.
Cool. I love it, Jake. Now, the question that I have, and probably some of the listeners have, because you've said your day job, what do you do during the day, man? Because like, it's like you got this kind of this this iron thing. You've got your gym, you've got your family, and then you've said several times like your day job. So what's the day job, dude?
So the day job is not as interesting as it sounds, unfortunately. I've worked for a company called Pitch Point Solutions for going on 10 years now, and they're a provider of mortgage fraud reports. So it's data. It's very opposite of what I do in my hobby life. And to flip back to working in the global gyms before, one thing I want to touch on is when I worked in the gyms, I lost my passion for training. So I learned a long time ago that if I ever want to have that passion for training, that I would prefer not to make it my life, although in a weird way I kind of have. But what I mean by that is like when I was in the gym all day, giving tours, giving sales presentations and all of that, and even like training with people, I sort of lost that fire for myself. At the end of the day, the last thing that I wanted to do was say, all right, time to do it for myself now. So
right.
Being able to have something that is separated as a profession from the gym has helped me with now. Anytime I come into the gym, I'm like, oh man, it's go time. Like I'm here for this at time. And even when I was building the space, I was like, this is cool. And I'm motivated to train here. But I just know myself, and I know that if I spent every hour of the day here, I would certainly be less stoked to train myself. And obviously, the day job is one of those things where it's very consistent. I do enjoy it. I do love the people I work with, and it's provided very well for me. So I'm very thankful to be able to have all the opportunities that I have. Although sometimes balancing it is challenging. And the day job usually comes first, so. That means that when I host meets with Wes, like you're talking about earlier, or when things come up for the gym, I rely very heavily on the people that surround me. But I think all those people will also say that, when it comes to it, like if something isn't getting done now or isn't getting done the right way, I'm very much like on top of it. So.
And I think too, Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, but and again, you kind of alluded to or kind of touched on a little bit a minute ago, but having that day job, it kind of allows you, I would think that it provides some sort of comfort in terms of, okay, I'm assuming you're probably salaried or it's an hourly wage, but there's some sort of comfort in, okay, I've got at least this amount of money coming in. It's gonna cover the basis for taking care of my kids, taking care of my family, right? Paying all those adulting bills, so to speak. So it kind of gives you, doesn't it, some comfort and then some freedom then to kind of like go out and step out and pursue some sort of passion project like you're doing with Des Moines Barbell Club. Is that kind of fair to say?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I learned a long time ago that no matter what it is, you need to diversify. Like it doesn't make any sense to only have one source of income for your entire life. If something happens and that source of income goes away, it's sort of game over for you. And this was obviously an important factor during COVID. Because with my day job I work from home. And another part of that too is I have the online programming business. So I've never paid for anything from my day job for the business. Obviously I pay my own personal bills and that stuff, but I have used online programming business to help fund the gym. to some
Awesome,
degree.
man.
And being able to have that diversified revenue streams during the times where COVID happened, so the gym has to close and things like that. And I should note that when the gym closed, my members, they wanted me to charge them. I told everybody, like, guys, like, obviously the gym is an expense, but like at the end of the day, I'm not going to charge you if you're not going to, if you don't want me to, or if you're not going to come to the gym because it's closed. But everybody stood behind the gym and said, no, man, like, I want to make sure that when this is over, that there's a gym to come back to, and I want to make sure that when this is over, that the gym can continue to grow. And huge credit to them, because that's the difference. When we talked about the difference between a gym like this and a commercial gym, like a commercial gym, people would have been like, nah, no thanks. Like, don't charge me. Like, I'm not coming. And I saw it, like, people complaining about getting charged from their commercial gyms too. And I'm like, guys, like I just said, if you want your gym to be there when this is over, because although the government may bail out some of these bigger players, like, they don't really care that much. They don't care if your gym stays open or in business.
Right.
Even if it's a local Anytime Fitness, it's just a franchise, and some guy just owns that gym. And if he doesn't have revenue, then, he's got some big bills. So anyways, my point is that being able to build that environment where people care about the gym as much as you care about the gym, that's what's probably motivated me the most to continue to build this thing.
Awesome.
More than anything, because it's been really eye opening. Because when I opened the first space, it was, I signed a 1-year lease. It was very much experimental. It was, guys, we're going to see if this becomes something like you say that it's going to, or if it's going to fizzle out. And here we are. So.
Yeah. Love it. Now, you've talked about a couple times, or you at least mentioned a couple times, the programming side of things. So just, because, some of the listeners of my podcast, Jake, they don't know much about powerlifting. They don't necessarily understand kind of like what you're alluding to or talking about in terms of programming. So let's just talk about, what do you mean by programming? And then, let's just talk about, kind of like, being a trainer, being a coach, kind of like, what does that all entail specifically for you?
Sure. So, back in the early ages of powerlifting, when I first started, there wasn't anything out there aside from cookie cutter programs. You had your 5-3-1, which, I'd been following. You had the cube method later on. You had, Westside Barbell had put out a couple like book for methods, and like like very, very beginner basic sort of stuff. Like, hey, this is how you should train if you want to be a powerlifter. And there were some, like, there was a lot of stuff for weightlifting and things like that a lot of people used and carried over to powerlifting. But there wasn't anything that was like super specific to individuals. There wasn't, and not that powerlifting really needs to get too specific for individuals, but like at the time, when you were training deadlifts, like there was no difference between conventional or sumo in these programs, or when you bench close grip or wide grip, there was no difference in training there. So those small differences, although they are smaller differences, can over time make a big impact to your training. And I think a lot of people realize, like, hey, I ran this program 5 or 6 times now. The first 5 times I got some progress, and the 6th time it's a dud, and it's like, all right, well, it sounds like it's time to switch it up. And then what do you do? So, naturally having this experience through many, many years of being in the fitness industry, through strength training and experimenting on myself, I was like, all right, well, a couple of the guys, they wanted to have something different. And I offered to essentially write their programming for them. And at the time, programming wasn't a thing. Like, there weren't online coaches. It was, hey, I'm just going to put your reps and sets and your accessory work and that stuff into a spreadsheet and send it to you. And then you can tell me how it goes. And that's sort of how it started. I had 3 guys at the time training at 22nd Street that trusted me for some reason. because I was strong probably,
Yeah,
to write their
probably.
program. And
That helps,
uh,
right?
right, it definitely does, to write their program. And it went really well. They got stronger. And, over time, I've probably worked with, upwards of 150 different powerlifters. And it's been a pretty wild ride. It's allowed me to, learn from different people, but basically where the services are today, evolving from there, I use a service called True Coach, which is an online app that allows the coach to upload the workouts. It allows the client to then respond to the workouts with comments and videos. Also allows for messaging. It also allows me to post like demonstration videos of the workouts. So like, obviously the tools have evolved, drastically from the very first Google spreadsheet back in the day. And, I send out weekly workouts to my clients, and they complete the weekly workouts with these comments and videos, do video reviews, do, weekly adjustments to their training, do, all sorts of different feedback. And all this is based off of, most of my lifters are competitive power lifters. So they're generally building up to compete in a powerlifting meet. So everything's pretty specific to those competition dates. I do have some clients that do bodybuilding and some that do like general fitness or strongman. So we're usually building just specifically to those goals. And yeah, it allows them to go into the gym and have the workouts pre-made and ready for them. Obviously takes out all the guesswork of, hey, what do I do when I get to the gym? It's geared specifically to them, their strengths and weaknesses and their competition times and what things they need to focus on. And it's a great tool without having to be there in person to work with everybody. I was doing this for probably 4 years or so before I opened the gym. So I was able to learn how to do it really well online. Obviously some of those people I trained with at 22nd Street. But once I opened the gym, I was like, hey, okay, cool. Now I can have my people come to my own spot, and it allows me to see what they're doing too. But you learn over time how to work with people remotely, and you learn your people, you learn how to deal with and work with different types of people, and injuries and strengths and weaknesses. And it allows you to build a good, truly customized program to make everybody stronger. So that's the general overview of what the online programming looks like. And I've, like I said, that's been more of my hobby and passion throughout the years, is being able to make people stronger that way.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've had a lot of positive results over the years.
For sure. Now, I want to kind of just get into powerlifting specifically, right? I started competing in like powerlifting competitions. I'd say it's probably like around 12 or 13. One of the first ones I did was at Des Moines Strength Institute way back in the day. And then I've done like the Iowa State Fair meet several times, like when it was like just under this 10 or whatever. But it's and so there's been kind of like you're talking about your type of gym. It's starting to become quote unquote popular, or people are starting to kind of attach to those type of gyms more. And I've really seen over the last, I'd say 10 years, a popularization in terms of powerlifting. But powerlifting overall, bodybuilding overall is still kind of like this. There's this subculture, right? It's kind of like, hardcore and kind of attracts a certain type of individual. So for you, powerlifting, Jake, like what does powerlifting mean to you? Why is strength important to you? Why do you continue to kind of pursue this thing called powerlifting?
It's a great question. So, I mean, getting into powerlifting, when I got into powerlifting, it was very, very counterculture. So it's still, like you said, it's classified more as like hardcore, maybe a little bit, different. But like back then, like it was like weird and scary, honestly. Like,
Yeah. Right.
if you walked into a powerlifting gym and you didn't know what you're getting yourself into, you'd be like, what is this place? It looks like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it looks like a dungeon. It looks scary.
Right. For
So
sure.
I got into it because, I was already into a lot of things that were very counterculture, like hardcore music, like MMA fighting, like things that were not, what normal people were doing. Naturally, the
Right.
transition was there when you go to the powerlifting gym and they're listening to hardcore music. So it's like, dang, this is home to me, right?
Yep.
Like this is very
Yep. Yep.
normal. And that's how I sort of got into it. A combination of that, plus I was already decently strong. It was it was a very natural transition. Now, fast forwarding to today, is very, very different. So, and I actually really like how different it is now because it allows you to introduce that counterculture vibe to more general population people to give them that feeling of, you don't have to do what people want you to do. You don't have to go and run on the treadmill at the Globo gym. You can come here and you can do the workout that's going to get you better results and make you feel better about yourself, and make you feel stronger, and be empowered without doing what the normal people do. Um, Part of it too was, when 22nd Street was in the basement over on Southwest Fifth, there was maybe two girls that trained there, maybe three, that I can think of.
Right.
I had I had a friend of mine come to look at the gym that was a female client at the time, and she told me that she wouldn't train there. She walked in and turned around and walked out, and she was like, "No, that's not the place for
Yeah.
me." And then
Uh-huh.
this last powerlifting meet that we hosted, we had more women powerlifters in the meet than men, and it's the
Yep.
first time that has ever happened. So to go from a sport that was obviously very intimidating to women, and is now
Uh-huh.
very, very welcoming. I love that transition because it just allows more people to feel the feeling of competition, to feel what it feels like to go out on the platform and crush a heavy lift, regardless of who you are. And that's, aside from, I didn't know what competition was. Like, I didn't know that feeling when I got into powerlifting. I mean, I knew the feeling of like hitting a heavy PR in the gym, right? And everybody being like, dang, that guy's strong. But to like go do a lift on the platform, to do your first powerlifting meet, to feel the nerves, to feel the adrenaline, like I think that that's something that everybody should feel at some point in their life. If they haven't felt it through other sports, obviously like I had wrestling, and MMA probably was the biggest adrenaline rush as far as comparing it to like lifting heavy and powerlifting. Um, but there's a lot of people that have gone through life without experiencing what that's like and without feeling strong. And I use the word strong as,
Mm.
universally, not just you can lift a lot of weights. And
Right.
to me, that's, you know, it's great to be able to offer people that experience, in powerlifting now. I know there's a lot of powerlifters that will bellyache and be like, "Oh, the sport's so diluted now. It's so," but at the end of the day, like we wouldn't have powerlifting meets on a regular basis if there weren't all these people involved. Like there would be no motivation for
Absolutely.
anybody to host powerlifting meets. There wouldn't be these gyms. They wouldn't exist. So
Yeah.
it is a give and take. Like when I was highly competitive and training at the gyms where you had people that were more general population, I would get frustrated. But when they have the best equipment because there's more people there, it's like, you know.
Sure.
But now, like even further than that, it's about realizing this whole thing isn't about yourself. It's
Mhm.
about everybody that's involved with it. And everybody probably goes through that like selfish mindset because powerlifting is, at the end of the day, no matter how everybody will say, oh, it's a team sport, but your team might be cheering you on when you go to the platform, but you're the one lifting the weights. So,
Absolutely.
like you're the one that has to dedicate the time. You're the one that has to put in the work, has to hold yourself accountable, has to eat a certain way, sleep a certain way, do everything. Nobody else is going to hold your hand through it. So, it's cool to see the evolution of like how supportive other people are of the sport and of other people. And, it's been a pretty crazy transition for the world of powerlifting, throughout the past like 10 years or so.
Yeah. We're going to kind of head towards the finish line here. I want to touch on a couple more things though. You brought up this last powerlifting meet that you and Wes promoted and put on. You talked about and you mentioned there was more females there than males, and that is something that I've noticed myself. And I think I talked to Wes about this during our podcast conversation, Jake. I really believe that CrossFit kind of opened up the door to females specifically, realizing that having a barbell in their hands is empowering. It's healthy. It's a beautiful thing, right? But I want you personally, from your perspective, because when I was like 12, 13, starting to go to some of these powerlifting meets down in Des Moines, there was like maybe, I don't know, 3 to 5 females competing, and they were like, older women. They were old school, hardcore, right? And it's like the last time I did the Iowa State Fair meet, I just did the deadlift, but I was there. I couldn't believe how many females are there, young females, and I just think it's so cool because being a personal trainer, owning my own gym, so often the ladies kind of do the cardio, right? And I am such a huge proponent of strength training for, I don't care if you're a little kid or if you're 95 years old, male, female. I think that strength training is just absolutely essential for anybody and everybody, right? And I really try to hit that nail on the head when it comes to ladies that come into my gym. Like there's science proves that like that resistance training, that strength training is so important for females because they're at a higher risk for like osteoporosis and all that stuff, right? But just from your perspective and maybe your own personal opinion, why is strength training, and it can be powerlifting, it can be, bodybuilding, it can just be going into a gym and just simply lifting weights, right? It doesn't have to be anything competitive. But why is lifting weights specifically for females, from your perspective, like so valuable and so important?
It's a great question. And part of this too, I think that you touched on, I thought it was a genius idea to open a powerlifting gym and a CrossFit gym, and it didn't work out like I thought it would. Surprising.
Really? Okay.
I didn't have a lot of women that would come and train in the gym at the time, but they were training CrossFit. Don't get me wrong, but there just wasn't a lot of crossover from the CrossFit gym, oddly enough. But I think the reason why this is transitioning and women are becoming more interested in weights, and I think it's simply because of the science and research that's showing like, hey, if you gain a little bit of muscle and you gain a little bit of strength, you're going to feel better, you're going to look better, you're going to burn more calories all throughout the day. You don't have to just go and do the treadmill every day. There's a lot of benefits outside of that as well, like you sort of touched on. And the age of the internet, being able to put that information out there, and you have Instagram, you have Facebook, and you're able to see what some of these women strength athletes are doing now, which is, it's absolutely incredible. Some of the lifts that some of these ladies are putting up, straight up, some of them are stronger than me. And I'm okay to admit that, but it's just, that gives a lot of empowerment to women, that allows them to say like, I don't want to go do the treadmill anyways. This girl's doing it, I'm going to go do it too. And then, gym environments are created specifically to embrace that. And when that happens, it's sort of the perfect storm of the transition of, hey, I'm done doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to go do what I want to do. And that's what this gym has always been about, right? It's like, hey, you come in and you do what you want to do, how you want to do it, and kick ass doing it, like that's what I love to see. So, and the other part of it too is like seeing some of the women that do our powerlifting meets. One of my clients in particular, her name is Carol Smolsky, and anytime she would hit a PR lift, it was like the best thing in the world. And she is a master's lifter, so she's an older lifter and got into powerlifting at an older age. So she's like the poster child of like, do what you want to do and be stoked on life doing what you love to do. That is the reason why I host meets. To see Carol's celebration after pulling a PR deadlift is, even regardless of what number is on the bar, it's like, dang, man, like that is living life. That is being stoked on life. And, I don't care about some guy that comes in and pulls a 700-pound deadlift that, like doesn't, like thinks he's full of himself or doesn't care or whatever. Like, cool. Like, I want to see the people that are doing it and they're like, are loving it and living life the way that they want to do it.
Very well put, man. So last two things here. We've just kind of touched a little bit on, doing the meets and promoting meets. Just again, maybe expound a little bit on that. I know that you guys just had one. I believe it was last weekend, if I remember correctly. But I know between you and Wes and kind of like what you guys are doing specifically down in the Des Moines area, it seems like between your social media, Wes's social media, 22nd Street Barbell social media, I'm kind of always seeing on a consistent, regular basis that you guys have quite a few meets throughout the year. From my perspective, it seems like they fill up pretty quick. So just touch on kind of like maybe some upcoming meets, really what you enjoy about meets, and anything else that you might want to mention about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Wes and I started hosting meets in like that 2013, 2014 era. And we had gone through a couple of different, federations, and we've had unsanctioned meets and all that. And around 2015, I think I brought the USPA, the United States Powerlifting Association, to Iowa. And I'm the state chair and like main meet director. I had a couple other people that have expressed interest in hosting meets throughout the state too. But yeah, we brought the federation here. We started hosting meets more frequently. What part of this too is just having a nationally recognized federation so that our local lifters can sort of put themselves against the same standards as lifters lifting all throughout the country, in New York or California. And then obviously they share national records as well. And we have all the state records now throughout the 5 or 6 years that we've been hosting meets here. So lifters are really, really excited about that. And what I love about hosting meets is, like I said earlier, just seeing all of the training that goes behind every athlete's performance, seeing the excitement, the nervousness, the whole experience from an outsider's perspective, and being able to allow a lot of people to experience that. We host about 4 meets a year. So the next meet is May 22nd and 23rd. It's actually going to be outdoors at 22nd Street. So it'll be a fun sort of outdoor festival vibe. And then we're also hosting a meet at the Iowa Games. So previous years, the Iowa Games meet has been a bench only meet. And we actually had plans last year to have it be a full power meet. But unfortunately, due to COVID, it was canceled. So we're going to be putting in the sanction for that meet, and I think it's going to be like the last weekend of July. And that'll be nice because we have a lot of people that are in that Ames in northern Iowa area that are interested in doing meets, and they won't have to travel quite as much. And then the meet that we just hosted a couple weekends ago was a drug tested meat. So the USPA has both tested and untested, and the drug tested side has been really taken off, mainly because obviously you can compete for records in that space as well. So we'll host more tested meets. There's been a large demand for that. And yeah, it's been going really well. That 2020 we had like 6 meets planned, but obviously, we ended up doing 3 of those 6 meets, which I was happy with, being able to do 3 of those meets with the situation at hand. But yeah, there was going into that year, I was like, there's no way we'll ever cancel a meet for any reason. Yeah, we were throwing that curveball, but all it did was increase demand. More people want to do meets now. Unfortunately, we had to credit a lot of people for those meets that were canceled. But now it's like, man, people are chomping at the bit, ready to get back into it, ready to knock these meets out. So I'm back to scheduling meets really consistently now. Obviously, I was a little hesitant to put stuff on the schedule until we sort of knew where this was headed. But with COVID, with the vaccine coming out and regulations being backed up a little bit, I'm happy to be pushing forward with getting back to maybe having 6 meets in the next year timeframe. So
awesome, man. Now, if somebody listening to this, is interested in participating in any of the upcoming meets, here locally in Iowa, where can they go to sign up or find out more information about that, Jake?
I would tell them to follow USPA Iowa on Instagram. There's also a USPA Iowa Facebook group, and all of the meets are posted whenever they're happening. Sometimes in the Facebook group, I'll even post, like the dates that I'm thinking about having meets or planning on having meets, just so people can sort of mark their calendars. The meets do fill up pretty quickly, just depending on how many days long the meet is. So like this May 22nd, 23rd meet is a 2-day meet. So there's 120 spots. So it's going to fill up a little bit slower. I think actually the first day, which ironically is the women and the lightweight men, is full, but there's still spots for 198 and above on day 2, which is the 23rd. But yeah, the one day right now in the drug tested meets, since we haven't really hosted too many of those, they're pretty high demand. So if you see an entry coming out for a drug tested meet specifically, I urge you to sign up sooner rather than later, because there was also a wait list on this last one that was like 12 people long. Like it was pretty insane. And I don't like it when it gets like that, because I want to make sure that everybody can get a spot. But it's heartbreaking when people message me after and they're like, hey, can you get me in? And I'm like, I wish I could. But so just, I would hop on social media, follow USPA Iowa on both those sites. And as the entry forms come out, they'll be posted in those 2 forms.
Awesome. Cool. All right, man. I definitely want to, before you kind of wrap up this conversation, Jake, I definitely want to give you an opportunity just to talk about what fatherhood has meant to you. You mentioned your 2 boys. You had one, I think you said earlier, just this past November, and you kind of mentioned in passing how it kind of, is a game changer, or was a game changer for you when you found out you're going to have your first son. So just touch on, fatherhood. What has that kind of meant to you? What do your boys mean to you? Maybe just share with us and everybody listening to this, kind of like how has your life changed, or maybe your perspective changed through having your sons?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, man. I'll tell you what. My sons are and having kids in general, the most challenging thing that you'll ever do in your life. I don't care what else you've done in your life. It is 100% the most challenging thing. But it's also the most rewarding. So being able to have my 2 boys, and now that my oldest Harrison is going through the age where he's learning how to talk, and he's becoming very impressionable, and I'm able to like sit down and sort of have like mini conversations with him. It's absolutely incredible, man. Like it's a game changer. But when I was getting ready to, and when we were preparing, I guess I don't know if you can ever really be prepared to have kids. But
Right.
thinking about having kids, I had this sort of freak out moment where, I wanted my wife to be able to be stay at home and like be with the kids because, you don't want to live that life where you take your kids to the daycare all day and they're around strangers and all that. So,
Yep.
I was like, oh man, like I have to ramp up my online program. I got to make sure, I got to ramp up my day job. I got to do everything way more than it is now. Just to support the family. Like, motherhood skills kick in for the mom. Like that was my fatherhood skills. They were like, okay, naturally you're the breadwinner. Naturally everything is insane. So that was the part where like, I didn't really think I was an anxious person, until I found out I was having my first kid. And I was like, oh man, I definitely have some pretty crazy anxiety happening right now. Um,
Right. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, now it's to the age where, my older son Harrison is, like I said earlier, having those conversations, learning, absorbing everything. It's becoming, much more real, I guess. Like when you have a baby,
Yeah.
and I guess this is kind of maybe the thing for dads naturally. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, like I totally understand. But like I didn't know what to do with the baby. Like I don't know. So learning that as I went was very interesting. Um, and what's
Yeah.
funny about it too is like my wife kind of had like the same thoughts. Like although once again she has that motherhood skill, she's like, we didn't have kids to have like the cute baby. We had kids to have like kids, right? They can like go and
Yeah.
play and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
do sports and like things like that and can talk to us and like so it's cool to be reaching that phase now. But I will say my older son, he was a very tough baby, and like he didn't want to sleep at night, was up every 2 hours. It was really challenging, and our newborn Holden is the polar opposite of that. Like to the point where so he's like 3.5 months old now. I took him. This is gonna sound absolutely insane. I took him to get a haircut. Okay, but hear me out. He was born with enough hair to need a haircut. It was actually pretty crazy. But he has a bald spot on the back of his head from how much he sleeps. So my buddy
Wow.
Jordan Peterson, he's a barber. I sent him a picture of the bald spot, because he had like a bald spot and a mullet. And I was like, "Hey man, what can you do with this?" He's like, "I'll just bring him in. I'll touch him up. We'll get him taken care of." And I was like, "Wait, are you for real?" So, anyways, I took him in for a haircut today, and he didn't make a peep. Like he got a full on haircut at 3.5 months old and did not cry, didn't even fuss.
Wow.
Like he made like two noises the entire time. But he's the
That's
baby you can
awesome.
take him and lay him down and he'll fall asleep on his own. Like he is amazing when it comes to this stuff. So thankfully we got a little bit of a break this time around. Otherwise, I think we probably would have went crazy. But yeah,
Yeah.
man, I'm just like so happy, so excited to see the growth of my boys, and like it really has. When we were talking about earlier, like spending that family time. Like I am a very driven, dedicated person, but it's really helped me realize like the things that I think are important when it comes to business or whatever, they're not. Like your kids and your family are absolutely the best gift and the greatest thing on earth. So that's
Mm.
that's my boys, man.
Awesome, man. I appreciate you touched on that. Before I ask you the last question, Jake, do you have any final thoughts, any final words, anything that you kind of want to share with the listeners before we close out?
Um, no, not really. I think that this was a great experience, man. I thank you for having me on. I really like to do these things because it allows me to, meet new people and spread the word. So I really appreciate that. For those that are interested in the gym, we have Instagram. It's DSM Barbell at DSM Barbell. The website's dsmbarbell.com. If you're interested in online programming, you can just find me on Instagram or Facebook, and that's at Hartman Strength. And even if you just have general questions or if you just want to have a conversation with me, I'm always open for that too. So doors always open.
Cool. And you're very welcome, man. I think I reached out to you maybe last fall at some point, and I was in the middle of buying, the gym that I currently own. And then, I have always done these podcast conversations in person, and just with all the things, I'm like, okay, like I love podcasting. I was like, I'm going to have to, even though I don't want to, I'm going to have to transition to kind of the remote thing. So it took a little while, but I do really appreciate you, Jake, taking almost a couple hours out of your Saturday afternoon to chop it up with me, to share your story a little bit. I do want to ask you just the last question before I kind of do the outro here. What sets your soul on fire?
Man, it's got to be my family. It's got to be my boys and my wife, man. Like I said before, everything before that was powerlifting and doing things on my own. And I had no idea what life was going to be like having a family. And it's I never thought like, oh, I'm not going to train anymore or anything like that, or I'm not going to like pursue different avenues for business or whatever. The things that like we talked about earlier, like I love sales, I love powerlifting, but like right now, man, like my family is it. That's what it's about.
Awesome, man. So just again, Jake, appreciate you taking some time to share with myself and the 127 Fit podcast listeners your story. Again, for those of you listening, if you want to reach out to Jake, he kind of shared where you can reach out to him on Facebook and Instagram. The Des Moines Barbell Club. Is it DesMoinesBarbellClub.com? Is that the website?
It's DSMBarbell.com.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. So I just want to encourage any of you listeners out there that are interested in strength, if you're interested in powerlifting, anything like that, if you kind of need a new, fresh program, I just encourage all of you to reach out to Jake. Him and I don't think I've ever met in person, but I've definitely been following him on social media for a while and all the things that he's got going on. And I would highly recommend Jake for anything in terms of strength and powerlifting. So 127 Fit podcast listeners, once again, I just want to thank you so much for your listening ears. They're greatly appreciated. If you would like to find out more about the guests that I bring onto the 127 Fit podcast, if you'd like to find out more in terms of kind of the vision and the mission of the 127 Fit podcast, if you'd like to find out more about myself personally, you can find all of that information on Instagram at 127 Fit. Facebook is Quentin Vars. And I just have a huge favor for everyone that's listening, whether this is your first time listening to the 127 Fit podcast or your 100th time listening to the 127 Fit podcast. I would just ask all of you to go, especially within the iTunes Apple podcast app, and leave a 5-star written review. That just helps more people find the podcast, and that helps more people obviously listen to it and get positively impacted. And one other thing I'd ask all of you guys, if you found great value in this episode with Jake, which I know you you have, I just ask that you would take this episode and you would share it on your Facebook and Instagram stories. If you think you would be a great guest, or if you have a friend or an acquaintance you think would be a great guest or guest on the 127 Fit podcast, or if you have any feedback or any questions for me, please feel free just to send me an email. That email is 127fit@gmail.com. And then per the usual, I will leave you guys with Proverbs 24:10, which states, if you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. This time until next time, I'll catch you guys later.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've done a few podcasts and it's always like I got to go back and listen to it. You never really know at the end. Mhm. I lost you. I can't hear you.